Thinking, originator of the concept of lateral thinking, consultant to a wide variety of corporations, educators, and political leaders, author of 62 books, the latest one entitled Free or Unfree? Are Americans really free? Well, provocative question. We thank you for coming on in. I want to get to the concept of behind the book shortly, but first of all, lateral thinking.
Yes.
What is lateral thinking?
Well, let me start a longer story. Human thinking is very deficient, and today everyone's concerned about climate change and green. That's unimportant compared to the poor quality of our human thinking. Now, what happened? At the time of the Renaissance, when Greek thinking came into Europe, people running schools and universities were church people. They did not need creative thinking, they did not need design thinking, they did not need perceptual thinking. All they needed was truth, logic, and argument to prove the heretics wrong. So that became the core of Western thinking. It's pretty good in science, virtually useless in human affairs. In conflicts, we try and judge the way forward. You're wrong, you're bad, we're going to beat you up, we're going to bomb you. Not enough design. How do you design the way forward? So our thinking is based on analysis, judgment, identification, not enough on design and creativity. Now, lateral thinking arises from an understanding of how the brain works. In fact, it's the first time in human history that methods of thinking are based on how the brain works. The brain forms patterns. All patterning systems are asymmetric, meaning the route from A to B is not the same as the route from C to A. I wrote a book in 1969 called The Mechanism of Mind. That book was read by the leading physicist in the world, Professor Murray Gell-Mann, who got his Nobel Prize for discovering the quark. Very enthusiastic. He commissioned a team of computer experts to simulate what I said in the book. He said, yes, it works exactly as you predict. And that's the basis for lateral thinking, is moving across patterns, not up and down them.
Is it in any way related to, I guess, the cliche the phrase that is used from time to time, thinking outside the box?
Well, the result is something different from what's in the box, yes. But it's a much more practical process. For example, not so long ago in South Africa, one workshop using one of my tools for a steel company generated 21,000 new ideas in one afternoon. Now, that's pretty powerful stuff.
21,000 new ideas.
In one afternoon.
Good ideas?
Well, some of them were. Some of them were. And another example, in England there's a centre which takes youngsters too violent to be taught in ordinary schools. They've stabbed the teachers, set the school on fire. 20 years ago, David Lane, the principal, started teaching some of my thinking to these violent youngsters, has done a 20-year follow-up. For those taught thinking, the rate of actual criminal conviction is less than 1/10. Compared to those not taught thinking.
So this is a system, this is a method, is it a cognitive sort of method, is it a rational emotive sort of method?
It's based logically on how the brain works. It's a way of creating ideas, a way of changing perceptions.
How does the brain work?
The brain works as a patterning system.
As a patterning system, but how do you employ that? How do you recognize that? Does this become a conditioned response?
No, let me put it this way. One day a fellow got up in the morning, he said, I have 11 pieces of clothing to put on. Let me see in how many ways I could get dressed. He got his computer to go through all the ways of getting dressed. Computer took 40 hours of non-stop working. Why? Because the 11 pieces of clothing, you actually have 39,916,800 ways of getting dressed. If you tried one every minute, you would need to live to be 76 years old, using your entire life trying ways of getting dressed. So if the brain worked like that, it would be useless. The brain forms routines, patterns. This is getting up situation, now I use the routine. This is this, now I use the routine. That's the excellence of the brain.
Is it tied into logic? I mean, I have socks, no. I need to put socks on. I will not wear socks on my head, obviously.
No, it's patterns. In patterns, you know that you've got to put your socks on before you put your shoes on.
So these become foundations of thought, so we can move beyond that?
It's how the brain works, and then we've got to say, what's the brain good at? Routine, recognition, identification. What's it not good at? Changing perceptions, changing ideas. Now, the whole of our culture is based on logic. Logic is a tiny part of thinking. In fact, a colleague of mine at Harvard, Professor David Perkins, did research, showed that 90% of the errors of thinking were errors of perception, not of logic at all. And there's a mathematical theorem, Gödel's theorem, that from within a system you can never logically prove the starting point. They are arbitrary perceptions. So I have programs in schools teaching perception. The Chinese government is currently trying it out in 5 provinces. If they like the result, they're going to put it into 4 million schools. So we teach thinking in schools, to businesses, everywhere.
We have to take a break. We'll let the audience ponder and think about this for a moment. Sure. Back with Dr. Edward de Bono, the book Free or Unfree, Are Americans Really Free? We will find out in a moment. Don't move.